Jan Shekhar, welcome. The next panel is Global Energy and Commodity Crisis, Implication for Financial Markets. Jan Shekhar is a friend and also an owner of Common Trends Research and Fund Management. He was earlier a forex trader and a commodity trader and known in the market in giving commodity reports and all. So, with this, a brief introduction, I would like Jan Shekhar to take over and introduce his panel and start the panel.
Thank you, Bijur. Thank you so much.
And I would also like to call Ashlesh Parekh, Director Gandhar Oil Refinery Limited, and Mr. Matthew, the Director of Almus Risk Consulting, to come over to the dais. Jana, will you take over and introduce your panel?
Yes, please. So, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this opportunity. Good afternoon, friends.
Unmute or something, Jan Shekhar.
Yeah, I've unmuted. Can you hear me?
Jan Shekhar, you have to unmute and speak.
No, I've already unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Great.
Start from the beginning, whatever you said.
Yes.
We are not hearing you.
Thank you, Bijur. Thank you for the opportunity. Good afternoon, friends. It's been a privilege being associated with Almus. A wonderful team. Doing great work with corporates across India, and I'm really privileged to be here. And more than that, I'm privileged to be moderating this session with some of the distinguished panelists we have today. Basically, we'll be talking about the global energy crisis that has set this whole economic derailing process, I would say, post-COVID. Essentially, we will be talking about the crisis as well as several other factors at play at this point in time, and then the future going ahead. So I will now introduce the panelists here. I have the privilege of introducing all the panelists. I will start with my dear friend Asutosh Deshpande. Asutosh is presently the head of risk and integrated supply and trading for Essar Oil UK. I think it's also called Stanslow Refinery. He has more than 22 years of experience in trading both the physical and energy markets. The kind of products that he normally deals is crude oil, petroleum products, freight, coal, LNG, RECs, RTFCs, carbon, petrochemicals, and biofuels. He has a very sound understanding of commercial optimization strategies for refining and marketing business, including emission trading and renewable transport fuel obligations. He's got a huge experience in leading risk management team for refineries on both east and the west of Suez. So prior to this, he was with Reliance Industries Oil and Gas Trading as derivative trader in the energy desk, and prior to that with Ernst & Young. So I had the privilege of seeing Asutosh right from a simple quant analyst at Reliance to someone who is now leading a team for Essar Oil UK. And Asutosh, I'm really privileged to have you today, and I hope to have a wonderful session.
Thanks, Gana.
I will now introduce Amit Kumar Sharma, who is another distinguished panelist today. Amit is a native of Bikaner, Rajasthan, and is the director for structured products in LNG, the LNG markets, which is a derivative of the energy markets. And he joined BP in June 2006. He's currently based out of Singapore. Amit is a geologist by education and did his first master's degree in artificial intelligence. He started his career as a seismic data analyst and gradually progressed to a trading and organization sort of a role. So over the last 15 years, he has extensive experience working across an organization's key function, such as commercial, regulators, legal, compliance, tax, and finance at decision-making levels. So in the current role of BP, Amit enjoys working very closely with energy companies across the globe on derivatives and structured deals. At work, his philosophy is to be counterparties' voice in the BP system, aiming to find a mutually beneficial solution. Amit, I really look forward to this interaction, and I'll be picking your brains on the markets and your outlook as well. Thank you, Amit. Thank you for accepting to be a part of the panel.
Thank you, Gyana, for the kind introduction, and it's a pleasure to be part of this discussion and learn from the fellow panelists and yourself.
So I'll introduce Debasthi Selele. Debasthi Selele is an experienced commodity specialist that has worked extensively with a wide range of corporates and institutional clients, offering solutions related to commodity exposure. He's got over 10 years of experience in commodity markets for investment banks in Johannesburg and London, exploring opportunities on the African continent. He's joining us live from South Africa right now. He's worked with many large projects in the country in South Africa, including the largest rail, port, and pipeline company on the African continent. He's executed a risk management solution for business units in the process, and various other African countries like Nigeria, like Ghana, even assisted a Canadian gold exploration company with gold mines across sub-Saharan Africa. So we are very happy and privileged to have you, Debasthi. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Good day, Ganaska, and thank you very much for this invite. I'm very excited to join you all today, and hopefully I can share some of my experiences with the rest of the attendees. And hopefully we can all also learn a lot from each other. Thank you.
Debasthi, we're also looking forward to hear from the horse's mouth on exactly what's the situation right now on Omicron from South Africa. I'll come to that during our panel talk. So I'm also honored to be introducing Ashlesh Parekh. Ashlesh Parekh is the director of Gandhar Oil Refineries in India, one of the largest liquid paraffin manufacturing companies in India. And he holds a bachelor's degree in science from University of Mumbai, and he's got a business administration degree from Asian Management Development Center, MET. So he's got a vast experience and expertise in the field of manufacturing and marketing of specialty oils and lubricants. He currently heads the international business team of the company, and he's responsible for expanding the global presence of the company by building relationships with international customers of the company present in around 100 countries. Thank you, Ashlesh. Personally, I've met you and we've interacted in the past. I've really admired, your way of doing business and your understanding of these markets. I really look forward to having a chat in this session. Thank you, Ashlesh. So, last but not the least, Matthew is from Almus, and Matthew is the director of Almus and is the head of research. He's basically been with Almus for more than 19 years, right from the beginning, and he's got a lot of professional degrees to his credit in finance. And he runs the research desk for Almus and helps the risk management process and gives his views on a daily basis to market participants. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for being here. We will interact and see how this thing goes forward, and pick your brains on the market views as well. Okay, gentlemen. Basically, we'll be starting with the energy crisis. Why I call it an energy crisis is simply because it hit us all quite sharply post-COVID. And I personally had a view that crude oil markets can't, go up sharply simply because there's going to be demand destruction in a big way, and then basically a lot of negative factors with alternative energy picking up. But there was a jolt because suddenly a lot of supply issues and logistic issues came in between, and things completely changed. So where are we right now as far as this crisis is concerned? Asutosh, I'm going to start with you. If you can unmute Asutosh.
Yeah, hi, Gana. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
All right.
So, what is the origin of this crisis, and the implication for businesses? So that if we can start off by rolling the session, it'll be nice. Please, Asutosh.
Okay. Well, Gana, if you look at this energy crisis, at the core root of it, there are only two reasons. One is the disrupted supply chains. So pandemic actually disrupted all the supply chains and kind of put the productions well below the normal levels. So they actually adjusted that. And probably the second factor was the more ambitious chase for the energy transition. While energy transition is certainly probably the future state, the movement to energy transition needs to be a lot more structured rather than disruptive. Now, just to give you a perspective, what happened when the demand recovered post-COVID in last few months, the inventories were already very low in the supply chain. So they could not be replenished rapidly to match with the demand recovery. And over and above that, what has happened in last few years, the stress that was given for energy transition, especially in the European countries, kind of exacerbated that. Now, to put a right perspective, probably it's better to see where it all started. So most of the economies which were showing very rapid recovery, be it US, Europe, China, even India, Japan, they were the ones who got impacted very rapidly. And if you see the origin, it started somewhere around mid-July, when we essentially had hotter than normal summer in the US, Northwest US, pulling more and more electricity without having natural gas supplies actually available to produce that electricity. The crisis was actually made worse by the fact that wind was not available. So Europe, if you see, has shifted now massively to wind generation, and lack of wind generation suddenly exacerbated the situation dramatically. And over and above that, the natural gas inventories was not there, and certainly there was a political angle in terms of NS2 pipeline, which kind of worsened the situation a lot further. And if you look at the impact, the prices kind of blew. The power prices blew almost 10 times. So we are trading in UK market. The UK market, we used to be like something like 25 to 50 pence, I would say GBP per megawatt hour, which is kind of 2.5 rupees to 5 rupees a unit, has actually blown to 550 GBP per megawatt. That was like a 55 rupees a unit. And that was kind of going on for quite some time. Once the power demand shot up, obviously the natural gas prices kind of tried to catch them up. So natural gas prices, which used to be something like 50 pence a therm, which I would say around $7-8 an MMBTU, shot to something like 400 pence per therm. So that's like $55 at MMBTU. Once these energy constraints were seen, you needed power, but the renewable power was not available. So you needed fossil fuel, but you already had a plan to kind of put off all the fossil fuel, especially the coal facilities. You need to kind of then restart it. And in the whole game, there was a coal shortage. So coal prices, which I recall 3 years back when we used to buy a 4-Tugar Indonesian coal, which was like a $30-35 was a dream price even for a supplier, went to as high as $160. An API2 price, which was like $70 a ton, went to $250 a ton. So all these kind of created a very, very vicious kind of cycle. And added to that, oil probably followed it a bit late because oil as such, there was no place for oil in power as such. This whole thing started with power, and OPEC was kind of managing the inventories quite nice with a very good, I would say, compliance. Now, these all factors came together at the start of the winter, when you expect that natural gas, there is going to be a colder winter, and most of the Europe heats itself using natural gas. So you don't have a wind, you don't have solar, you don't have natural gas inventories. There is NS2 problem because Russia was not kind of pushing the inventories, and Europe was completely out of that. So this is kind of an origination which then kind of penetrated in all the economies.
Right.
India, if you look the impact for India, it was seen only when the oil prices kind of rose sharply, because India typically consumes around Indian demand is around 4.5 million barrel per day. So around, we can say around 220 million tons a year, or 1.5 billion barrels a year. So every $1 increase essentially hits India by $1.5 on a $1.5 billion on an annual basis. This is
So
probably hit.
that is also part of the CAD you're talking about, or just the value impact?
The value impact, and then obviously it will then penetrate down to the CAD. And one thing which probably the underlying theme for all these things was the carbon price. So the carbon price, which is traded in basically Europe and UK, which used to be something like 20-25 euros a ton, shot to 70 euros a ton. And in UK, in fact, last 2 years average was around 22 pounds per 22 GBP per metric ton, actually shot to as high as 75 GBP per metric ton. So this caused so dramatic disruptions to all the business. In fact, there were fertilizer plants in UK which shut down because they kind of believed that they cannot run economically at the NG prices. Do you expect to see this kind of immediately going out? It doesn't look like, because the supply chains are still having very low inventories. You need to replenish them. You need to have a transition to a newer stage, and probably we will probably see that a little more time to kind of get into that normal shape. So
Great.
this is probably the perspective. And if you look the impact for financial market, it certainly doesn't do direct impact, but it does indirect impact through inflation. Because once as you grow, your GDP growth comes back, energy demand grows back, and if you can't supply that energy, it probably pushes the energy prices higher, puts an inflation. If this inflation, I mean, we all hope that it remains transitory, but if it doesn't remain transitory, then suddenly we will see a lot of pressure from central banks to at least increase rates or pull back the accommodative monetary policy. So last 2 years, we probably felt
which they've already started doing. Yeah.
And once that happens, it's a double whammy for all the businesses. Your borrowing cost probably will go up, your interest cost will go up. The inflation, if it doesn't come down, your business margins are going to go down, and suddenly the profitability, I mean, most of the businesses you would have seen during the pandemic time have reported probably record profitability because the interest costs were low, the margins were high. Suddenly both things will start hitting them and could paint a probably difficult picture. So we hope that it remains more transitory, the supply chain gets repaired sooner than later, and kind of businesses get to their normal momentum as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Ashutosh. I think you've covered some of the points which I wanted to cover going forward. Now let me bring in Amit Sharma into the discussion. Amit, you've also seen the crisis, and you're someone who watches the derivative markets like the LNG and coal markets very closely. Just give us a broad perspective of what I just asked Ashutosh, but where this originated. What he told is about oil, but I understand coal. The main culprit is China. I think that's where all these issues crawled up from. So your take on that, Amit, please.
Thanks, Gana. Well, thanks to Ashu, most importantly, for covering up and giving us a well-rounded perspective on the situation that we have. I'll try and give my perspective, an effort to what we have spoken about. I mean, from where I am, if I observe the current market situation, there are the party, the heart of the party, the ones that would like to be known and seen, like inflation, supply chain issues, demand shocks. And then if you move away from those talk of the party and the limelight focus points to the deeper trouble, which is quiet, but is actually impactful. I mean, these ones have actually caught the headline, and if you see, the financial market is sometimes reacting, sometimes overreacting to it. I mean, at one time you say it's a commodity super cycle. Wow, it looks super cycle. The other day you hit a COVID variant, and then the market comes off. I'd like to spend some time on the factors which have not got the limelight, but still are even more impactful. And the biggest that I see there is the world has been on steroids in the last couple of years. We've come out of, for a lack of better word, unprecedented times. Like COVID wasn't. History repeats. All the panelists as well as the listeners here would agree to me that history repeats. It's a cycle that we would have seen in different version. From the visibility I have, COVID is unprecedented. The impact, the global impact of it is just beyond any definition. Now, what has COVID done? COVID has actually got the whole world on steroid. COVID has actually got everyone on steroid. Central banks have been pumping money. Is that my voice echo? Or?
Echo, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So. Okay, I'll try and be. Yeah. So on this part, the central banks have been generous enough in providing the steroid to the world. The steroid, and now coming out of COVID, like the milestone Ashutosh mentioned last year, July. If you see the volatility in the market, equity market was one directional thanks to all the steroid coming in from central bank. Then came the recovery mode. China has been doing great in the recovery side. Words demand center. China's demand hasn't gone down. India's demand has picked up. Now with the demand coming from these two big adolescents, and the shock that the world had from the lack of supply. I mean, the last 2 years, if you see, less investments in mining. The world has been transitioning from hydrocarbon to renewable. It's not going to be immediate. It's not a step change. It's a transition. Now, in that transition, which we would see probably in another 5, 10, 20, 30 years, the world is still hungry for resources today. Now, where is that today going to feed you? There is no supply. I mean, if you look at the investments in the last 2, 3 years on oil production, LNG, coal mining, has come off. Of course, that would have a repercussion on the demand. I mean, China is not going to stop. India can't afford to stop. We all definitely like to talk about greener world, cleaner world, and I'm for it. But I'm also for the opinion of an affordable world. If you want something to be affordable in the future, you have to make sure that the demand centers are sufficiently catered to. Now, from my visibility and my view, the impact is coming from these guzzlers of energy demand, energy hungry, which are now struggling because there's no investments in the immediate need. It's a tussle. The market is tussling. Financial market is getting impacted. The sentiments are getting impacted. I'm mixed.
Sorry to interrupt you. Does it also come from the fact that crude prices are languishing earlier, just pre-COVID, and of course we've seen negative prices briefly, and that has sort of discouraged further capacities and
Exactly.
Yeah, please. Sorry.
So, I mean, rightly pointed. I mean, when was the last time we had a negative commodity price? That's a shock. Now that shock made people rethink, okay, is that investment even worth it? Now, that negative price was momentarily for one futures contract, but see the impact of it on the whole value chain. The investments were completely stopped. I mean, from BP, we are promising net zero. We are ourselves cutting down our oil investments. Today, global demand is 100 million barrel a day. We see 2050, 20 million barrel. Yeah, but that's a few years from now. China and India hasn't stopped consuming oil, right? They need coal, they need LNG, they need everything. Supply chain bottlenecks are not helping. So, I mean, it's an unprecedented time. We are seeing some unprecedented outcomes of the demand and supply shocks. It's detrimental for developing economies such as India and China. It's not healthy. The future is renewable. I fear because of the lack of affordability of the current hydrocarbon and the energy, that would further push down a few years, if not decades. I would not blame China or India. I would blame the transition being slow and haphazard versus a smooth transition from hydrocarbon to renewable. You can't complain about an adolescent trying to grow and be a young man. So,
yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Amit, for the wonderful opening remark. Tebasti, your opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Ganaska. I think what's very interesting when we look at the global energy crisis, particularly from the context of what we say as emerging markets, is that if I look at 18 months ago, we obviously had the start of the COVID crisis, and we literally had that shock in the system, as Amit had pointed to. And literally everything came to a standstill. What I would like to do is talk from the point of view of the fact that I work very closely with mining companies and refineries. And when you actually then looked at the implications that was happening at that stage and the turnaround that we then saw as things started to actually open up and as the world economy started to actually find a way to actually move forward past the challenges that we were facing in 2020, there was this very huge exogenous shock in the system to actually get going, get commodities out. And even today, I still see a lot of counterparties coming into the market requesting assistance with regard to actually getting commodities. And how that's translated back is when you look at the mining side of it and we're talking to them, they've been struggling to actually firstly meet the energy requirements in terms of actually getting the product out of the ground. And you see that same theme being continued through, particularly, let's say, with regard to your energy or your marginal energy supply. The case of South Africa, India, China, it's all the same in that it's decreasing very rapidly. And you've seen the crisis that we have had across the whole, these emerging markets. And obviously that's exacerbated the commodity cycle and particularly the energy crisis. And when I look at then, at a broader aspect in terms of the energy crisis itself and what the implications have been, what's quite interesting as well is that, from the coal market's perspective, which is obviously quite an important commodity from the point of view of India, South Africa has been a large exporter and its biggest partner is India with regard to the Asian market. But we've seen that China, as we've spoken about now, with its own requirements to actually come in and actually meet its energy requirements, has now been slowly actually coming into the local market and actually taking up a lot of the supply that we're seeing here in South Africa. And that's slowly obviously putting pressure in terms of the demand side, and with the bottlenecks that we're seeing in terms of supply because of logistics, that's obviously going to support and push prices up further in that regard. And if I look more broadly and I talk about ESG as well as the tune to actually move away to renewable energies, CapEx alone has actually been very low across mining spaces. And that obviously exacerbates the whole situation when you look at what has been going on. If you look back to 2011, when we came out of the global financial crisis, CapEx was roughly about 110 billion US dollars across your top 50 miners. So hence they saw there was very good opportunities for them to get involved and grow mines. In today's world, we're looking at roughly 60 billion US dollars that's being put into CapEx. And what that's meant now is that, you know, with all CapEx products, we know that it usually takes about 5 years for us to actually see the mutations around it. And so these bottlenecks that you're currently seeing now are going to be persisting because the capacity to meet demand is just not keeping up. And also the requirements around ESG and renewables has put additional strain on the system in terms of actually putting additional requirements around CapEx, which only adds further to this global energy crisis that we're seeing. So we're going to be in this space, I believe, for quite a while. And as much as we've seen this correction with COVID at this point in time, with regard to the recent variant, I think the longer term trend, when you're looking at the stats around supply and demand, is still very much supportive of commodity prices, but in particular, where we are in terms of energy prices. Yeah.
Great, Agasthy. Thank you for that. But I'm going to ask you a very, very important question, which I think markets are all anticipating worldwide. I think everyone is now looking for answers as far as this new variant called Omicron is concerned. And though they say that it originates from South Africa, I think you mentioned to me yesterday that it actually started in Europe. So we're all very, very eagerly waiting to know what is happening on the ground and what is the situation there in South Africa.
Okay. So, with regard to the latest variant Omicron, what is very fascinating, and I think what has caught a lot of attention from the global audience, is that when it was first detected and when we're looking at the implications it had, the numbers have been growing effectively exponentially in the terms of new cases in the market. And as I pointed out to you, last week when we initially did an indication of what the market looks like, or rather what the new variant looks like, we initially had roughly 30 cases per day. And come by end of last week, Friday, we were sitting at over 4,000. Now, this particular Friday, yesterday, our infection rate has gone up to 16,000 cases. So you can see that this variant most definitely has a higher transmissibility across the population. But I think what has been quite positive is that when we're looking at the stats in terms of the people that have been hospitalized, the amount of people that are getting hospitalized versus the amount of new cases is relatively low compared to previous waves. So hence, we're actually seeing that the fight to actually have vaccinated population is assisting in that regard. And if you are catching the latest variant, the symptoms aren't as pronounced and aren't as serious as they would have been had we been looking at it initially when we started out with the whole COVID crisis.
That's fantastic to hear. That's fantastic to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think more importantly is that, when we're talking about the labeling of the fact that the COVID, or rather the Omicron variant, was a South African identified, it actually comes back to our biogenetics being able to actually sequence and identify this variant as early as possible compared to the world population. I mean, other world geneticists. And as I pointed out to you, Janan, is that they actually did find this variant did exist in Holland before we actually announced it ourselves. So you are actually seeing that this has already spread across the world, and we're not too sure where exactly it started, but at least we have identified and we understand this variant a bit more, and hopefully we can take the necessary measures to try and curtail it and share that information with the global economy to actually alleviate and fight this current variant.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tabasri. Thank you for that. Ashlesh Bhai, I will toss this question to you. It's on basically the impact of logistics in refining. So how has it impacted your business so far? And how have you sort of taken recourse to that? Have you done any sort of hedging or any sort of risk management to manage that? Please, your thoughts on that, Ashlesh Bhai.
The logistic impact has been
I'm unable to hear you, Ashlesh Bhai.
a shipment to US, which would cost around $60,000 before COVID, but has increased to $10,000. So
Now I can.
the freight cost has been a huge element in increasing the inflationary pressures, increasing the cost of the raw material, and having an overall impact on the pricing. This is being a huge setback in terms of the overall pressure the supply chain is going through. Apart from that, if you ask me, there has been some positive impacts because of digitalization. Nobody would have thought, anybody would have worked from home before COVID, but it has become a new norm. With this situation, sitting at home, we could do whatever we want in terms of our business, run the businesses. But yes, on the shop floor, people has been there on the shop floor doing the work. Irrespective of be sitting at home and doing our work. Overall, if you see, it has had an impact on all the commodities, including crude, metal, steel, iron ore, everything. Everything has surged up by more than 20 to 30%. And it has had inflationary pressures, added inflationary pressures because of this.
Thank you, Ashlesh Bhai. Matthew, I'll come back to you on when we're doing the price outlook. So pardon me if I'm putting you on wait. I'd now just like to dwell on the crude factors at play at this point in time. Prices have come down lately, but then it's still 50 to 60% higher than where it was in 2020. So clearly, it doesn't look like this is going to abate anytime soon. What we're only understanding or what we're only seeing is a resurgence in crude oil prices, though OPEC has given its latest outlook, and they feel that they would be increasing output going forward to ensure that the economic recovery is back on track. So Ashutosh, I think you have a slightly different view on that. You mentioned to me earlier. So you please let me give us your thoughts on this. What are the factors at play you think now and going forward in the coming months?
Yeah, again, oil price is basically a marginal barrels, which prices the whole 100 million barrels. So we are using around 100 million barrels per day globally. And what it prices are the last few barrels, and who controls those last few barrels essentially decides the trend for the oil price. So few years back, when US suddenly sharply rose its production from 3-4 million barrels per day to 13 million barrels per day, essentially they were the marginal barrel producer, and oil price obviously was kind of remaining a lot under pressure, was not kind of exploding. But if you look now, US has completely curtailed its growth. It's back to maybe below 10 million barrels per day. There are a lot of political pressure not to issue any new licenses. So there's a lot of political tussle that's going on. So whether US will really come back sharply to the previous levels, nobody knows at this point of time. So again, the control has gone back to OPEC. And when I say OPEC, it's mainly Saudi and Russia, which are the biggest producers. So out of 100 million barrels, roughly 20% comes from these two countries. So the marginal barrels are again sitting back into OPEC plus deal. That is where the pricing will remain supported. And what they do, OPEC, they don't look at the price levels. they generally target the inventories. So if they see inventories across the supply chain blowing out, they will cut the production. And they actually, another part that look at the curve, the oil curve. So they try to keep the curve in backwardation all the time. So the moment it tries to go into contango, that itself indicates that you are producing more than what is being required at this moment. And Saudi has shown a great desire to kind of put on and off the tap, even to the extent of 2, 3, 4 million barrels per day. That is, I think, the critical factor. The other factor is the new investments that are happening are certainly not as aggressive now. So while we have seen a very sharp volatile moves in last few days, last 2 months, oil went from $65 to $85. And in 4 or 5 sessions, it came back from $85 to $65. And again, yesterday when OPEC actually said that we will keep continuing production, the prices went from $65 to $72. So pretty puzzling from somebody who will try to kind of correlate a fundamental analysis with the price move. The challenge is, unless the inventories are repelled, that's what I was saying, replenished in global supply chains. At the moment, most of the inventories across OECD, US, Europe, even China, we are sitting almost to the low end of the 5-year average, the seasonal average that you look. Your demand is growing up, supply is not coming up, inventories are at the 5-year bottom. So it's a perfect recipe for any fall to be bought. And over and above that, you have got a huge fund positions now on the back of the easy money that was available, and the algorithms which do not look at the fundamentals. If the stop loss gets triggers, they are ruthless to kind of then cut the position. So this all will keep the volatility intact. Will you see a negative oil price? I certainly don't believe that. Will you see probably a little lower price? Yes, because if you look the current balances, the first half 22 certainly looks longer than what we are sitting now. And that is where, you know, OPEC is trying to kind of play now that, look, I'm going to produce, but if required, I can pull it back. So they are kind of giving both. So don't go short in the market. The kind of signal that they are giving, if you want to go short, you probably are at a risk that we can take some stringent action. This is a kind of a balance that's going to happen for next 6 months. But in a longer term, if you look, there will be certainly a big worry, because there is a natural decline that happens in oil field. So naturally, most of the oil fields decline. In last 2-3 years, what used to be a 5-year cycle for oil had actually changed to 9-month cycle, because US shale oil you can bring online within a 9-month time frame, as compared to a large projects in OPEC, which would take like 4 or 5 years. So that basically the investment decision cycles have also changed dramatically. And this is all emerging very dynamically. Over and above that, you have a huge pressure. Everybody is trying to go to net zero, and net zero means essentially you will have to cut your diesel, you will have to cut your jet, you will have to cut maybe naphtha, and all those things typically will get replaced by either biofuel, and the black horse in this whole thing is hydrogen. Because at the moment, your hydrogen costs are $1 a kg produced from fossil fuel, and $8 per kg, which we call as a green hydrogen. So basically splitting water using the solar or PV renewable energy. So that cost, which is currently at around $8 per kg, is expected to be around $1 per kg by 2030. And that's going to be probably a big game changer as and when that happens. So technologies certainly will play a lot role. The sooner these technologies are available, it probably will push oil a lot more earlier than what we are expecting now. So having said that, I don't think till in next 10 years, we probably will see a very big pressure on oil, because India, China, they have abundant appetite for it. Even on the west side, you are not going to kind of go off. The recent crisis did show that you need to have a very, very orderly transition to renewables rather than doing a disruptive. And crude will play a very important part and will not probably see the kind of bearish pressure that we saw somewhere around March 22 getting into a negative territory.
Great. Interesting point you made about fundamental, how fundamental factors are not, resulting in the right price approach. Someone told me that fundamental these days are funda-mental. So it sort of really makes it go mental. Anyway, Amit, I'm going to come to you on the LNG coal markets and the derivative markets. Basically, I think the outbreak of COVID has sort of disrupted the logistics and supply chain, I think resulting in major losses in the transportation sector. So increasing demand for gas power generation, rising number of LNG fuel fleet are giving it a fillip. So you're an expert in that field. So please take us through the LNG market and where we are at this point in time.
Sure. Thanks, Ashu. There's not even a single word that I would not be aligned to from how you've described the market. I'm glad that my views match with someone who's an expert in the topic. Now, coming back to Gyana on your point. So in the LNG market, just taking a thread from what Ashu said, hydrocarbon to renewable, the transition has to be smooth. You can't suddenly stop using coal. You can't suddenly stop using oil. You have to transition it well. And in that transition, LNG is going to play a significant role. If you look at the demand growth from the developing economies, we certainly see LNG have been displacing the traditional fuel sources, energy sources like coal. Even though during crisis situations, the world took a few steps back, looked at coal, I think, and that's a organization view as well, that the world is becoming more and more aware. We are becoming more and more resilient to all these COVID variants coming. The life must go on, the show must go on. LNG will play a critical role. Hopefully, once the geopolitics settles, the weather conditions settle in the Europe, LNG prices come off, hopefully, which again is a seasonal trend that we see every year. During winters, LNG prices go up, summers they soften. Once that happens, we would start seeing Indian buyers coming back to the market. So if you look at the last 3 to 4 months of activity, we have not seen a single LNG spot purchase from India. And what's that telling you? Affordability. Yeah, we all want to be conscious of that, but we still need to service our current energy needs. We ran towards coal prices shot up. Hopefully, in the next 3 months or 6 months, when the market softens, the players who are looking at affordable fuel would come back to the LNG, and LNG is going to be the transition fuel for the next 5 to 10 years, not just helping the hydrogen, which is like Ashu mentioned, is the dark horse of the new energy domain. I see nuclear can come back in some pockets, but the world would reduce its reliance on coal, not completely, but gradually. One interesting fact that I have started to observe being in this seat, a lot of awareness towards managing your needs. I mean, the story that Indian consumers have in the past said that, oh, we got hit because of the long-term LNG contracts. Viable, not viable, commercial, not commercial, it's a choice that were made. But now look at the current shock. The spot is way more expensive than the term contract.
Right.
The mindset has changed. Oh, the term could be better in a situation like that. And these experiences teach us. Also, look at what is happening in the rest of the world. If you look at how much China has procured or termed up its volume volume in the last 2 months. You'll be surprised. China has been going out procuring LNG terms for up to 20 years. Why? Because they want those terms to actually come in and set up the base for their energy requirements. They are also taking a step forward. Liquidity is coming in more and more, both on the physical as well as paper market. I'm seeing LNG hedging happening, which is a typical consumer producer play. Producers tend to hedge longer periods than consumers. But if you look at what has happened in the last 2 years, I've started to see even consumers hedging up to 5 to 10 years forward. Now, that's a very good sign. I won't call it green shoot because green shoots would mean differently, but I would definitely see an inclination towards your energy security. I'm also seeing a lot of Asian consumers, like it has to be Japanese in Asia that show the trend, then JKTC market, China added to it. I see India also following up, Bangladesh, Pakistan, following up and entering into long-term contracts, hedging their exposure, hopefully making their transition smooth to a more secure energy demand that they foresee, which is not coming down. It's only a contango market in that.
But do you think China's issues with Australia, is that going to be resolved in the coming years? I mean, the coming year in 2022, or if that continues, I think we're pretty much in the same boat, and we're going to be having demand issues like this. So where do you think you cover Southeast Asian and South Asian markets very closely? So that is a very important factor, isn't it? China's problem with Australia.
So, Gana, thank you. So when you observe the world, there are headline topics, the party animals, and then there are these big impact points. One of that is China-Australia relationship. It's going to be a huge impact to how the whole Asia-Australia region plays. And rightly mentioned, I would see healthy competition continuing. China trying to dominate in a way or a fashion that they know the best. However, the commercial acumen would overplay all the geopolitical muscling around. China has a vision. They have a style. They will continue to pursue that. Having said, they would not let their people go hungry. Affordability still remains a big question mark for China. China is not a rich nation. China is a poor nation, and a poor nation can be aggressive, but at the end of the day, need food on the table. And for that food on the table, commercial acumen would surpass the other strategies that they have adopted, and the issue would reach a stage where they would find that if we need to keep our plates full.
Wonderful, wonderful. Ashu, I'll come to you on this. You've been also very closely watching the Indian financial markets, and the impact of crude prices on the Indian markets. So I just need to pick your brains on what is the correlation. But some of us are quite naive in terms of understanding the correlation between the crude products and refined products. For example, if some product, an OTC product, how much of impact would that have on, or rather the crude oil price movement, how much of it would have an impact on products like, let's say, LNG, let's say, naphtha cracks. So your thoughts on that, please.
Okay, so cracks as such, if you look probably 15 years back, we always probably see some kind of a positive correlation between the refinery margins and the flat price or the crude price. But nowadays, you will not, if you try to establish a statistical correlation, you have seen very high margins where crude price was $30–40, and you also have seen extremely low margins, even the crude price was at $80. So it's kind of, there is no perfect correlation per se. Having said that, the crack generally reacts with some lag to the demand of that particular product. Now, crude is just one end of the story.
Right.
What actually get consumed is the product, and every product has a very, very different use. So if you look at LPG, we use it for burning cooking fuel. LPG is used in PDH. Basically, it's producing, they do dehydrogenation and try to producing out of propane in China. And there are large uses for that. If you look naphtha can be blended in petrol or can be used as a feedstock for petrochemical, basically the naphtha crackers and all. And typically most of the Asian countries have large petrochemical complexes. They try to kind of switch between LPG, naphtha kind of economics, whatever suits them.
Right.
The transportation fuel is a different ball game because that will have to correlate with the growth in the sector, the automobiles basically. So your ICE engine growth, and that is something which is many people are putting a question. If you look another 20 years kind of a thing. So there are countries who have very categorically said that they will stop using petrol and diesel cars maybe from 2030, 2035, 2040. So that does mean that that is going to go off. And as some of the leading refineries in the world have already provided their vision, they say that probably our state in 2040 we will be producing jet fuel, because you will still need jet, and we will be producing petrochemicals.
Okay.
So that's one set of refiners are that, and this will decide the demand of that. There is also other school of thought which is saying that if you use renewable fuels, they blended along with the fuels produced from crude oil, basically the refinery gasoline and refinery diesel, will still keep growing for at least next 5, 10, 15 years. Let's see what happens after that. And as I keep mentioning, the whole thing will gyrate about what happens to hydrogen. If hydrogen can be brought to a level which is currently envisaged, a renewable hydrogen can be brought around $1 per kg, that certainly will be a real game changer for whole world. And that is a real threat to all the fossil fuels. Unless that happens, I certainly don't see much threat in a big way to fossil fuel in next 3 to 4 years. And as you say, the long-term view changes very dramatically now in every 6 months, because the situation is so fluid, the demand supply forces are so fluid, and everything gets governed by what banking system, how the banking system wants to fund. And now there is a forum of 89 central banks, and they are trying to kind of visualize how they want to decarbonize the whole banking system. If they decide to do that in a very structured manner, if they don't, if they decide not to provide funding to new projects, obviously it will certainly tilt the balances more and more in against the fossil fuel. But I would say it's still too naive to kind of have that on ground. For next, at least till 2030, most of the fossil fuels will be there. And the demand pattern is not going to go off.
That's also coming from your prejudice, I guess. But I agree with you. I think there are short-term issues which are not going to abate anytime soon. But yes, long-term looks a bit dicey as far as fossil fuel is concerned. Tepasthi, a quick view from you on the mining sector. How much of it, because you're in the center of mining there. Have you come across these refineries or these mining companies where they've gone through issues due to rising energy costs, and that having a major impact on many of these metals? In fact, we've seen prices rallying so sharply lately, and of course they've corrected a bit now, but it was largely blamed on rising crude oil prices. So your take on that, please.
Thank you very much, Kanad. So when I look at the mining space and thinking about the energy role at this stage, one of the things that has definitely been very prominent has been the whole thing about decarbonization and net zero. Now, Ashutosh did mention it to some extent. And I think where the challenge for mining companies has been is that to actually get to the stage whereby they can actually have any material impact towards reducing their requirements towards these heavy fossil fuels or trying to be more green has been the fact that it requires significant capex on their behalf, but also at the same time too, it actually means that in terms of their production and how they actually operate, they have to think about how do they transition easily or smoothly as possible from that. And I think about some of the projects that, as an example, Anglo Coal has undertaken. They've currently brought on board renewable partners who have been supplying power into Eskom's grid, which is our local energy supplier. And they've been working closely with them to actually see how they can actually move forward in terms of decarbonizing their operations, but also coming closer to net zero. Now, they're just one example of the challenges or at least the opportunities that lie in the coal space to try, or the mining space rather, to try and actually mitigate their requirements around, or at least reduce their requirements around fossil fuels. And I think where the learning lessons have been from them is that, one, we still have a huge requirement around diesel and as well as coal to get these operations going. To put in catalysts and all these things to actually help them get better in terms of managing their exposures is going to take time. But more importantly is that I think mining operations are still looking at the fact that there is significant demand compared to the supply that they are at now. So hence the job to actually look at what is the trade-off between looking at ESG versus trying to meet current demands is one that's a bit tricky for them to actually manage. But I think as lessons get learned, hopefully then we will start seeing the implications around what the current energy market has been playing on mining, hopefully does not exacerbate commodities and the mining industry further, and hence push commodity prices up.
Great. Matthew, I'll come to you now. We're basically, also trying to get some kind of a price idea, now that we have all the factors that we discussed. Where do you think, Brent or NYMEX WTI is headed, and a very broad projection on the levels that you're expecting by, let's say, March 2022?
Yeah. See, the first thing that we need to understand is that because of the ESG thing and the focus on ESG and the lot of funding that is going to ESG, we have an ESG implicit premium of around $20 to $40 that comes in crude. US was the largest producer. Now you are seeing the US production is coming down because the whole Permian Basin is now federal land. I mean, it is federal land, so President Biden has stopped allowing them to do all that shale oil thing. So, important thing that is structural change is that we have a shift in the supply. So that has importance to the price equilibrium level. Now, this is not technical. This is of course fundamental, but that is the basis of it. Now, coming to pure technicals that we look at, the normal patterns that we look at is that because of price action last week, despite the announcement by Russia initiating that announcement, the prices come up after a dip. So it means that next week it will be shifting towards the 78-80 barrier. That is a barrier. From there, you will have the next. It's a timing cycle that the Fed will be announcing. Taper maybe accelerated. That again pushes prices down. So this is one cycle down towards, and it is surprisingly showing around 65 to 62 on Brent. I mean, I know it will be a bit surprise, but that would be the reason when you have to put in geopolitics into it. If you look at what is happening, not in China or Iran nuclear deal, that is all given, and we know what is the supply that can come from Iran. The problem that comes really is what is happening in the Ukraine-Russia border. Right. Russia has been practicing a lot of military activities at night. America is not going to support Ukraine. They are not, of course, not a member of NATO. When prices dip down, that is where you will have the whole, catching by the neck kind of stuff, because the whole Nord Stream pipeline and all goes from natural gas pipeline goes to Germany from through Ukraine. So Russia and Saudi Arabia, the way they are coordinating all this is a geopolitical thing, and that is the real danger for India. Another important thing that I would like to add is that from there, the prices will start rising and the upward target comes around 110. So that, of course, everyone is talking about that. But before that, you will have these swings and cycles. Important thing because clients are concerned about rupee and all that. If you look at last 1 week, 2 weeks ago, we had a very high correlation between natural gas and the rupee. The price of natural gas started moving up. Of course, the crude pulled it because of the substitution effect. Then you got the dollar rupee moving up. Now the correlation, if you look at the rolling correlation, the correlation has broken down. Now you will see natural gas going down to maybe below 4. But dollar rupee
interesting that you're talking about. It's interesting you're talking about. Sorry.
Correlations also break. So this is another thing. Another important point is that you have a very high correlation. If you look at a weekly or monthly rolling correlations, crude moving up is very good for Indian equities. I don't know. I mean, you can argue for maybe it is inflation, maybe it is pricing power, maybe it is bond supply. But this is the most important thing: is that the correlation. Maybe it may be a bit on a lag. With sudden supply shock, prices might come, the index come down. But this is another important point, that after that you will have a rise in crude with a rise in Nifty index. So the correlation lasts for a long time. So this is the overall view as such.
Wonderful. Ashlesh bhai, I'll toss this question across to you. We are one of the largest liquid paraffin manufacturers in the country. In the last 6 months, we've seen, most of these products have risen by around 50 to 60% in price, and we must have had raw material procurement issues. So how did you deal with that?
Inventory of around 45 days. But yes, there has been a pressure on the supply chain because of, as I mentioned earlier, because of the logistical issues. But yes, I mean, with COVID, people have in fact started spending more. I mean, so the growth has been robust. We have been growing at more than 15 to 16% year on year. And in fact, we had our largest revenue over last 4 years in March 21. So we are quite skeptical and quite hopeful that this growth will continue.
I had a few questions on the greenhouse gas emissions and alternative energy, but I think we're running short of time. So I think we can throw the floor open for questions. Are there any questions from the audience? I think people are keen to, leave being the last few sessions. So Pankaj, what do you want to do?
So I have one, Gana, if you give me.
Yeah, please, Amit, go ahead.
So there's an interesting point mentioned by Matthew, and if you could, so he mentioned crude and Indian equity has a correlation. I'd like to hear more from him on that, if he could.
Yeah, Matthew, please.
Market analysis. So how we approach markets is like we start with normal technical, which is like your Edward and Maggie stuff, classical technical analysis. Then we need to find out for clients that they need turning points because they need to hedge, right? So we look at price points, how to change. So the normal technical text would say that those are called oscillators. But what happens when it is overbought and oversold? Then you look at more mathematical transforms. So the price need to be transformed to normal oscillators, which is again a mathematical small kind of transform. Then you transform it into further mathematical equations, like for example, Fisher equations or Fourier cycles. So that is where we try and connect the dots to find out. Then what if we are wrong? I mean, you can look at all time series analysis, do a machine learning algorithm, LSTM and all that. But ultimately, the forecast and the actual price with on the back test gives a big lag. So we need to look at all intermarket analysis to find and see that our analysis is coming correct. There is one part we had on natural gas, the kind of correlation that happens. You can look at another correlation with crude, which is that what happens to Canadian dollar CAD. Dollar caddy has not been the caddy has to be strengthening if crude prices is going to break out at 80, 82 and all that. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. 2.2, 1.24, 1.2 it stopped. That was the first indication that the crude is going to reverse. And the other intermarket is how prices react to news. We had two news that time, but the SPR, I think they started releasing a little bit of distillates around that time, around October end. I think Biden gave some kind of authorization to release some SPR, not the crude invent, but the other one. And then what happened is when the SPR prices start the rally in the prices start stopping. So that is another indication that that happened. Then you get the news that the Biden's popularity is coming down. Then the only point is that SPR has to be released. So you had to have intermarket analysis. All these things come together, and this is how you not only get into technical language, but also then you explain to the clients how what can happen probably. That is a better way to put it, and rather than the whole technical language of it becomes. Maulik always keeps asking me, why don't you tell what exactly do you do? I just tell him it's a secret. It's not a secret actually, but it's just that it's too mathematical to tell someone and make them. So that way, if you look at crude analysis, crude oil, and if you look at just put crude chart and Brent chart and our stock Nifty charts, you look at just the price change. I mean, just a bit of a lag, maybe 1 month, you will see both of them together. Rolling correlations comes out at 0.94. So even if the price Nifty on sudden, let's say Russia kinds of annex some part of Ukraine, you will see that there will be a reaction in the global markets. But that is fine. But then later it will just catch up. So ultimately the rolling correlations will catch up and it will give you so those are chances where Indian investors should get to buy stocks at those dips. So all these global events triggering crude prices higher will actually be a kind of a buy on dip opportunity for Indians.
Great.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew. My key takeaway from this panel is that don't short the market at this point in time. Though we have seen prices correcting, this is not a time to short the market. Still, the fundamental issues that drove the market are continues to be there, and there are no nearby signs that it will change. Maybe in the medium term to long term, we might see changes coming up. But I must say that the financial markets, in fact, in the last year, we saw the energy markets impacting the financial markets, but it's a turn for the financial markets to now impact the energy markets. Now that Fed is talking about tapering, in the coming years, in the coming quarters, you will see the interest rate hike expectations, and that having an impact on commodity prices. So there are mixed factors now at play. I think we need to see how they all merge. So my own sense is that we are headed into a market which is going to be more volatile and complicated as we get into 2022 with no clear direction. Factors both positive and negative weighing on the market. But I think the positive factor where the crude prices are currently having supply issues, that is going to outweigh the negatives. And we will see prices continuing to rise going forward. And with that closing remark, I'll hand it over back to Biju.
Thank you, John Shekhar. Thank you very much for moderating this panel. And for want of time, I'm quickly thank Ashlesh Parekh, Director of Gandhar Oil Refinery India Limited, to be agreeing to be in this panel and sharing his thoughts. Amit Kumar Sharma, it's great to hear you, about the way you explained about why the oil prices have gone up and all. It was a pleasure to hear you. Matthew John, my own colleague, he talks about the pricing and technical things, it was always a pleasure to hear you. And I heard from Tabasti, this is for you, from Tyagarajan, that you are one of the best oil trader in the world. So your views are always right. And he was telling most of the time, we don't understand you. He has to send his WhatsApp message to get what you are talking. The same I also experienced. I'm sorry for that. But you are the authority in oil pricing. And to Ashutosh Deshpande, thank you very much. The immense knowledge and the way you explained about this. In fact, this panel needed 2 hours maybe. Okay, with this, I thank you all.